All right, well, why don't we go ahead and get started while folks are settling in. Welcome back, everyone, from our coffee break this morning. I know that last panel ran a couple minutes long, so we'll try to get on schedule here. Thank you all for coming back. We started the morning sort of setting the table and looking at the past 18 months and hopefully beyond, looking at the political, social, and economic changes that our industry has experienced, but our society as a whole has experienced over the past 18 months. And now we're going to start looking internally, looking at some of the changes that have been happening in industry, some of the changes in the investment community, the business model, realigning value with values. And we've got a great panel discussion to talk about that today. So to get us started, I'm going to introduce you to our moderator, Christy Pollard, who is the principal at P2 LLC, a full-service public affairs firm specializing in strategic communications, public outreach, stakeholder engagement, policy, and political consulting. Prior to her time with P2, Christy served as the president and CEO of the Jefferson County Economic Development Corporation, a nonprofit consortium of business, community, and governmental leaders striving to create greater economic vitality in Jefferson County, Colorado. So please welcome Christy Pollard.
Thanks, Dan. And thanks to all of you for joining us today for this really important conversation. So we're going to be talking today about ESG, environmental, social, and governance, and how that plays into investment decisions. And we've got some really fantastic experts today who are going to impart some of their wisdom and answer some great questions. So let's get to know our experts. We're going to start on my left with Alana Fishman. Alana Fishman serves as the managing director in the strategic communications segment at FTI Consulting and is based in Denver, Colorado. She advises clients on the evolution of their ESG strategies and tailoring solutions to the unique needs of their organization. She also provides guidance and leadership around stakeholder engagement and change management best practices. A frequent speaker and author on ESG, Ms. Fishman routinely engages with institutions, professionals, and students across a wide range of industries. Prior to joining FTI, Ms. Fishman was a vice president at Cornerstone Government Affairs, where she led the firm's ESG practice. She has significant experience advising boards of directors and leadership teams on ESG strategy, engagement, and communications. She has also led client service integration across the communications and government relations practices. A frequent speaker and author on ESG, Ms. Fishman routinely engages with institutions, professionals, and academics across a wide range of industries, including energy, healthcare, consumer products, agriculture, and technology. Help me welcome Alana Fishman. Secondly, we have Jim Redinger. Mr. Redinger is an experienced LNG and financial executive who has been in senior leadership positions with Stabilis Solutions since co-founding the company in 2013. Mr. Redinger served as the president and chief executive officer of Stabilis Energy from 2018 to August of 2021. He also served as the chief operating officer and chief financial officer of Stabilis Energy from 2013 to 2018, where he led all sales, operations, and financial functions for the company. During this time, Stabilis completed the construction of its first liquefier, acquired Encana Corporation's domestic small-scale LNG business, completed and then exited a joint venture with Flint Hills Resources, and acquired Prometheus Energy. Prior to these roles, Mr. Redinger was a senior investment banker at UBS and Credit Suisse, where he provided transaction advice and support to C-level executives and boards of directors. This experience included capital raising and mergers and acquisitions for public and private companies. Mr. Redinger has also worked as a management consultant. Help me welcome Mr. Redinger. And then last, but certainly not least, we have Chris Wright. Chris Wright serves as the Chief Executive Officer and Chairman of the Board of Liberty Oilfield Services. Additionally, Chris founded and serves as Executive Chairman of Liberty Resources, a Bakken-focused E&P company, and Liberty Midstream Solutions. He has had a lifelong passion for energy and its role in human life. He has spoken on energy to the UK House of Lords, the state's Attorney General, federal and state judges, debated the merits of the shale revolution on TV, and given over 100 talks. Chris completed an undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering at MIT and graduate work in electrical engineering at both UC Berkeley and MIT. Chris founded Pinnacle Technologies from 1992 to 2006. He served as their CEO. Pinnacle created the hydraulic fracture mapping industry. Pinnacle's innovations in fracturing practices also helped launch commercial shale gas production in the late 1990s. Chris was chairman of Stroud Energy, an early shale producer prior to its sale to Range Resources in 2006. Chris currently serves on the board of directors for Liberty Resources, Urban Solutions Group, U.S. Ceramics, and the Federal Reserve Bank Denver branch. So help us welcome Chris. So you can see we've got some fantastic experts here, and we're really going to dig into this conversation around ESG and the role that it is playing in financial decisions. As with many other industries, we all know that the energy industry is seeing investors who are increasingly applying ESG factors as part of their analysis to identify material risks and growth opportunities. Today, shareholder value is viewed as more than just a dollar figure that realigns value with values. As we continue to see ESG metrics applied alongside traditional metrics, the energy industry must continue to innovate and think proactively about these strategies. But it shouldn't surprise us that Colorado is actually leading ESG strategies, and we're excited to hear more from our panelists today. So we're going to give each of them an opportunity to make some opening remarks, and then we have some prepared questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience after those questions. So Alana, if we could turn it over to you.
Absolutely, and it's on, it's working, it's a good start. Well, first, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with all the experts in oil and gas in one space. So thanks for letting me join this group. I guess an important place to start is, when I first started in the ESG space 6 years ago, this conversation has changed tremendously. I'd walk into a room and the conversation was like, why are we considering activism, environmentalism? Like, why are we still entertaining these conversations? And now it's morphed into, how do we get our foot in the door? What do we need to do to start building our ESG program? So when I first started to today, it's been absolutely incredible to see where this has morphed and where the conversation has gone from sustainability being a nice to have to a must have. And Christy, you and I were outside just talking about how there really is no opt-out clause anymore, particularly for this industry. And what's interesting and important to point out is this industry, the experts in this room, are the ones who are actually leading the ESG movement and the ESG change. All the other, industry verticals, from technology to, housing and real estate to telecoms, everybody's getting their foot in the door with this, but it's oil and gas who's really developed our reporting capabilities, who's really gone forward and put their neck out first to say, what can I say and it's still okay, and I'm not going to be judged, I'm not going to give too much information about my operations. And so I think it's important to note that this whole group deserves the recognition for what it's been doing, just because I've seen over the past 6 years the evolution of it, and unquestionably this is the industry to have really made the biggest strides in ESG. So really it's well done to this group. I guess really for my opening remarks is I'd love to bring the perspective, as a consultant who gets to see ESG implemented from all across industry verticals and all across oil and gas companies of different sizes, public versus private. There is, the good news is there's no one size fits all strategy. The bad news is there's no one size fits all strategy for oil and gas, right? The opportunity is for each company to say, how do I start and what does that mean for me? Every single oil and gas company has different needs, whether it's human or resources, let's say human capital resources, financial resources, time and effort that can be put into ESG. What Chevron might do is very different than what a private equity backed oil and gas company is going to do. But does that mean that the smaller company needs to wait or needs to, be more cautious of what they put out there? And that's a resounding no. We help clients who are in the private space develop a full implementation, just like you'd see a private company implement, because sustainability, as we were just discussing, is a must-have. It creates value. So why wouldn't a private company do it or a small company do it like the larger public companies? And that's where we are today. And that's why this movement has been so interesting to watch. And then from a third-party perspective, I'd say that there are probably, as we stand today, three major themes for the ESG movement. And those have changed from 5 years ago to even 2 years ago to where we are right now. And I'd say that, if anybody leaves the room today asking what should we focus on as we're building an ESG strategy, even starting thinking about an ESG strategy, it's leadership. What role does your leadership have in the ESG space? It's talking about setting credible, authentic, transparent goals. And I'm sure everybody in this room, don't hate me, I'm going to bring this up too soon, but carbon neutrality, net zero, those are the key hot words right now. What does that mean for your company? Do you have to do it? If you don't do it, are you behind? Are you not as credible as an ESG player? The answer to that is no. I'll just go to the end point there. But, how do you create transparent goals? And then ultimately, how do you create something that is genuine and true and authentic, in the sense that if anybody were to dig deep into how you created your strategy and reporting, that they'd come up with the same answer you put out there. So those are the three themes that I just wanted to touch on really quick, and then hand it off to my other distinguished panelists. In terms of leadership, I'm sure everybody's seeing board members are being called to front and center to address what their companies are doing in ESG. It's no longer the CSR department, Bob, trying to pull together a shiny report and then get it out once a year. Is absolutely not what we're seeing anymore. If that's where the company is, then you're already 10 steps behind, because we're talking about boards, nominating and corporate governance committee, audit committee, executive compensation. They have a voice into how the company is run. They are the stewards of the future of the oil and gas space. So what are they doing to create a governance framework to enable strategic decision-making in the day-to-day operations of a company? That's the first step, is board buy-in and awareness to what the company should be doing, where they're going. Equally as important is management, executive leadership. We have now, I'd say this is extremely common for the executive leaders, the CEOs, the CFOs, the CIOs. We now have chief sustainability officers. Those positions are sprouting up everywhere, because what happens at the top needs to be disseminated down. And what we're seeing now, even for the companies who are doing a fabulous job implementing an ESG strategy, as we dig into it and we're helping our clients manage this, we're finding that employees in the field have no idea what ESG is. It's one of their values. It's something they report on, and they have a lovely report, but they don't know how their jobs tie into it. Why do you put a hard hat on in this space, for your TRIR or, accidents, injuries, anything like that? Why does that matter to your ESG strategy? So for leadership to find a way to disseminate their values down to every last employee, so everybody knows how they can contribute meaningfully to your ESG program, those are the companies that are shining right now in their ESG strategies, and who can talk to your investor group meaningfully and say what your company is doing. Equally as important as the second pillar, and I know that we're going to get into carbon neutrality, net zero, there is a pressure for companies to report anything and everything, right? It's just kind of the kitchen sink. Everybody needs to be reporting to SASB, GRI, TCFD, IPCA. You got to be talking about net zero carbon neutrality by 2030, 2050. What does that mean? Well, it's not good if you put a number out and say, think we can hit it, and then you have to walk back because you've made no progress, or people start asking you questions for what your plans are for it. The worst thing you can do is have an executive throw out a promise like that and not be able to back it up with what your plans are. So you got to have a plan of how are you reducing your own emissions? What are your internal efforts to minimize your carbon footprint? For what can't be managed internally, what are you doing to purchase in terms of offsets or renewable investments that you can go ahead and cut it down from that offset perspective? And then finally, what are you doing in the technology space? Are you investing in batteries, hydrogen, carbon capture and sequestration? Those are all the things that give your story credibility and why you can hit a 2030, 2050 deadline. And also be sure to clarify between scopes 1 through 3. That's biting some people too, right? We can do scope 1 and 2. That's under control of oil and gas. Scope 3 is a mess. We all know it, but companies are getting into that space. So you want to know what you're promising if you're putting it out there. And then the last thing I want to touch on before I hand it off, which only comes to mind because we just helped a client manage this. We have a fabulous client who has a great ESG report. It couldn't be better. They've spent millions on it. It looks nice. You can click through it. You get brought into all these different pictures and images. You feel good reading it, But one investor thought that this group was misleading the public about their sustainability claims. They said, we don't think that this company is being genuine about what they're putting out there. And even just the accusation caused Ernst & Young to step in and to say, well, we're going to investigate this. I hadn't seen that yet. So in all my time of doing ESG, it's just been what you want to report, how you report it. But now you have an auditor coming in, having the CEO, the chief sustainability officer say, well, we got to pull together this information and show how we're doing it credibly. And we had to dig deep and to make sure that everything they were promising was not an intentional misleading of the public. Sure enough, they weren't, but just the accusation of it was enough for it to impact that company's brand and to cost. You know, if we were to put a cost of how much a CEO's time is on a certain issue, I don't even know how much that costs for that amount of time for that issue to be resolved. The point is anybody can claim something about you. You have to be able to back it up. And ESG is too fluffy right now. There's nobody managing this other than ourselves, right? So just make sure that you have a process in place. That when somebody asks you how you got to that number, you can show it. You can come back with a very credible response and a transparent response. Prepare your executives to say the right things. Don't make empty promises. And those are the things that we're essentially guiding our clients on every day. And I know that this industry in general is working through it. So happy to jump into questions, but I appreciate the time.
Thanks, Alana. Jim?
Thank you. My name is Jim Redinger. I've spent about the last 10 years working in distributed natural gas, which includes liquefied natural gas, compressed natural gas, and pretty much any way to get gas from a pipeline to off pipeline applications. So a virtual pipeline, we call it. So in our business, we've been mostly on the E side of the ESG. I'll tell you a little bit more about what we do in a couple of minutes, but one of the messages that we like to get out as we talk to groups like this and talk to customers is really the discussion on environmental issues, on sustainability issues have really become very one-sided. And we think there's really three parts of that energy triangle that needs to be talked about. The first is clearly environmental and sustainability. Cleaner is better, greener is better, being environmentally responsible is better. And sometimes that's the sole goal. But what we also see is there's two other things that are needed to make the energy a practical solution and a realistic solution. One is it's got to be cost effective. You need energy solutions that can actually perform the function they're meant to perform in a cost effective way. So whether you're producing a good, whether you're heating a house, whatever the application is, it's not done at a cost that's not sustainable to the user or not sustainable to society over time. So finding solutions that are green, but also cost effective, it sounds logical, but sometimes isn't included in the discussion. The third part of that is reliability and predictability. And as we look across the country and we look at, of all places, Texas this spring, which couldn't turn the power on and couldn't turn the heat on for a variety of issues. If you look at California every year with the lack of grid reliability in the hottest times of the year. If you look at New England, where they don't have enough access to gas, to heat, and for other uses in the wintertime, we've got a big issue building in this country where we're very much pushing the E and the environmental sustainability part of this, but we're forgetting the reliability and predictability part, which most people like when their heater, their air conditioning come on. They like when they can cook dinner when they want to. And so while it sounds very simple, the message of environmental sustainability needs to be paired up with cost effectiveness and with predictability and reliability. If you extrapolate that and you think about where the world's been over the last 100+ years, as fossil fuels have really been the driver of a lot of our economic success and prosperity, you can look at a few key factors in there and say, well, let's look at lifespans. 100 years ago, all of us could have expected to live till we were 30 or 35 years old. Today, average lifespans varies by country, but in the US, you're 75+ years old. If you overlay gross domestic product or income by individual, 100 years ago, it was several $100s. Maybe if you're well off, it was $500 or $1,000. Today, it's in the US, it's 30, 35,000 plus. In other developing countries, it's less than that, but it's substantially grown. So we're seeing longer lifespans. We're seeing greater economic prosperity and not even calling it economic prosperity, economic comfort, where people can sustain comfortable lives for themselves and their families. We're also seeing, if you look at the data, that the number of climate-related deaths, that could include floods, that could include droughts, that could include fires, all the various things that are labeled as climate-related, has gone from tens of millions 100 years ago, even 75 years ago, to hundreds of thousands globally over the last several years. So there's a lot of anecdotal discussion about certain events being caused by certain things. But if you look at the data longitudinally over time, you see that the number of deaths from climate incidents has gone down significantly. This is all overlaid with the advent of fossil fuels, starting with biomass, going to coal, going to oil, now natural gas, and now renewables, obviously increasing emissions, increasing CO2. There's no confusion that CO2 emissions have increased, some temperature increases. But you need, again, to look at this at the human benefit and the human flourishing that's happened by the reduction and elimination of energy poverty, not only in the US, but around the world. So trying to have this discussion in a one-sided way, I think we all see that happening in a lot of media, a lot of press, and a lot of conferences. And what we encourage our customers to do is think about, and the world to do, is think about this as really a combination of clean is generally better. We like it. We're supporters of it. We got to make sure people can afford it, and we got to make sure people can rely on it. These are important parts of it. So what I've been doing for the last 10 years is, again, creating this virtual pipeline where we take natural gas from places that it is to places where it could help on any one of those three factors. So if you're on a pipeline, if you're a power plant, you can take the gas from the pipeline. At your house, for the most part, you can do that. But surprisingly, there's a lot of places, even in the United States, even in Colorado and Texas, which have abundant gas, that you can't get the gas on a pipeline to, but could benefit from those things. If you look at from the environmental standpoint, the US is the one or one of the few countries that's met the emissions obligations from the Paris Climate Accord, even though it wasn't part of it, primarily because it used gas to eliminate coal and other more polluting sources. That trend can be continued on a distributed basis. If we go to a localized power generation station that might have been burning diesel and convert it to natural gas. We can go to asphalt plants that use diesel and fuel oil to heat up the asphalt to lay down. When we think about infrastructure growth, that's a big part of it. We can put gas and natural gas in there, reduce emissions significantly. Number of applications, and when you look at taking gas to replace something like diesel or coal, you can reduce particulate matter emissions, NOx emissions, SOx emissions by 75 to 90%, significant reductions. You can reduce CO2 emissions by 25 to 30%, not 90%, but 30% CO2 emissions. If you could extrapolate that globally, would be a great goal to hit, and it's close to the goals we're trying to hit. So there's a number of applications out there that you can use. And so what we've been doing in the distributed natural gas business is taking gas from pipelines. We either supercool it to put it in a truck, or you compress it, put it in the truck, and then bring it to applications in the oil field, in industrial sites, et cetera. So that's a background on what we've been doing. But I think that if I could impart anything today, it would be thinking about hopefully having these conversations in data-driven, holistic ways, as opposed to picking one of those parts of that energy triangle and making that's our only goal. Because at the end of the day, that doesn't really produce the results in human flourishing and the things that we also need to see along with emissions reductions.
Thanks, Jim. And Chris.
Thanks. Yeah, so I grew up about 10 miles south of here. I say my short bio is a science geek turned tech nerd turned energy entrepreneur. So I've been an energy nerd my entire adult life. I went to MIT specifically to work on fusion energy. You know, it's the source of power in the sun. And actually, there's been enormous progress just in the last week announced on this at the National Ignition Facility at Lawrence Livermore Labs. So energy is awesome stuff. It matters, and there's cool technology stuff going on. At Liberty, we started this business 10 years ago, just 10 years ago. And a lot of it was driven. We weren't using those initials then. ESG to me is not new. It's as old as human flourishing and capitalism and free markets are old. But we started the business we're outdoorsmen with a passion to both improve the environment, more importantly, to uplift human beings. And the social factor was simply huge. We started this business as we're coming out of the financial crisis. Highly educated people were kind of bouncing back, free money and interest rates, financial markets were booming. But blue collar people, most of Americans are, and rural people were having a very rough time. And frankly, they've had a rough few decades. That was a driver of starting Liberty. This was a way to create thousands of good paying, career oriented jobs for people that didn't have so many opportunities, and helped drive this shale revolution that was bringing increasing energy access and raising and lowering the cost. I'm the weird energy guy who loves lower cost energy, driving the cost of energy down and benefiting the planet. So we started it boiling with passion for the causes that are now maybe hip. I should say as well, though, that the dialogue to us, we wrote our first ever ESG report, came out just a couple months ago, and it's called Bettering Human Lives. That's our goal. Our goal isn't to check a box or to meet some goal that someone else says is really important. It's what we believe will drive the bettering of human lives. And let me divert on that for a second. There is no climate crisis. There's been no increase in extreme weather in the entire roughly 100 years data sets we have. We have a different length in different areas. And as Jim pointed out, the annual deaths globally from extreme weather events have dropped 95% over the last century, from an average of 500,000 a year to 25,000 averaged over the last decade, and the last 2 years below 10,000, the lowest ever recorded. And those three highlights, that's from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that just released their assessment report 6. Now the news headlines, what you hear from politicians, what you hear from activists, of course, are completely different, but they're not consistent with the report and the data itself. So at Liberty, again, we're not about fashion. We're about numbers and data. And I speak about communication professionals say, I shouldn't say things like that. It's very bothersome to a lot of people when you say things like that. And the report, I don't say it like that. It's very gentle, just the data and explanations. But I'm finding it increasingly important because the energy dialogue getting divorced from reality has massive, massive costs. One close to home, 20% of children report have nightmares about climate change when they're going to sleep. I speak in schools all the time. Children have way less interest in going into science or technical fields because what they see it is science is thou shalt believe, thou shalt adopt the alarmist doctrine, or thou will be called the denier and shunned. That doesn't bring people, that isn't what brought me into science and engineering. Science is a process, a critical questioning and engagement of ideas and a wrestling with it. Worse is the cost to humans, where we're starting a phase of just massive malinvestment. And let me talk about the problem globally. Particulate matter, by far and away the most important emission, is responsible over 90% of the deaths from air pollution. And the most pernicious form is indoor air pollution. Somewhere between 2 and 3 million people die every year simply because they don't have access to hydrocarbons. A third of humanity, 2.5 billion people, cook their daily meals burning wood, dung, and agricultural waste inside their homes. 2.5 million preventable deaths every year. There's several other million easily preventable deaths from malnutrition, lack of access to clean water, even basic education. Solving all of those require energy, basic energy for the lowest income folks on our planet. And the dialogue today, the US came out last week and said, we're not going to support the World Bank lending to third world countries for fossil fuel development. The 2 billion people that don't have reliable access to electricity, it's now politically popular to slow and stand in the way of them getting that. This isn't unfortunate. This is just deeply wrong. So please read our report. It's 85 pages long. We go through these data and numbers. And one of the problems we have today is people say, if you can measure something, you can do better at it. Our industry, I think as Jim mentioned, and maybe Alana mentioned, largest driver of reduction of greenhouse gas emissions of any industry in the world by far. So it's not that reducing greenhouse gas emissions isn't a good thing. It is a good thing. The question is the cost and the trade-offs. In the United States, we drove it down by natural gas being cheaper than coal. it went from a bit player in electricity to 40% of US electricity. The net result was that per capita greenhouse gas emissions in the US are lower than any year since I was born. And natural gas also burns cleaner than coal. So particulate matter, SOx and NOx have also lowered. So it improved the quality of human life and actually helped put downward pressure on electricity prices. We've been the largest gross reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. The United Kingdom has the largest percentage reduction in greenhouse gases, but by a completely different path. Top-down redesign of an energy system, and they elevated the price and reduced the reliability of energy so much that the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution deindustrialized their country, deindustrialized it. Total energy consumption in the United Kingdom is declining because every energy-intensive manufacturing has just been moved overseas. If you measured their all-in emissions, they haven't actually moved very much. They've just outsourced it. They are by far and away the largest per capita importer of greenhouse gas emissions. Does that make any sense? To export the jobs, not change what goes into the atmosphere, but export the jobs? That of course doesn't make any sense at all. I'm quite optimistic on the future availability of energy, the future of people rising out of poverty, the future of continuing to clean our environment and to grow opportunities for those least fortunate in the world, whether they're people in dire energy poverty or people growing up in a troubled neighborhood in Denver. It didn't get an education, didn't get habits, maybe have the wrong color skin. That passion, that's why our company's called Liberty. For us, we're driven by a passion to grow human opportunity. Everyone has a dream and they're different. But what we want to do, and we believe society should do, is everything they can to increase the chances that people can pursue their dream and their wishes regardless of where they come from. But that takes a brutal honesty and a willing to call something out even when it's wildly unpopular.
Great, thank you, Chris, and thanks to all of our panelists. So we have some prepared questions that we wanted to ask. So the first question is, as we're seeing more and more investors seeking opportunities to both maximize their investment and also feel good about their investment, what steps or advice do you have on marketing to these kinds of investors? I'm sure you love the word feel because it's not a data-driven emotion. So thoughts on how you market to these folks?
Maybe I'll jump in since you wanted me. Yes, I do have a problem with that word feel good. Because it is a huge driver. Humans are dominantly emotional. All of us, certainly myself, our decision-making is dominantly emotional. It's what feels good, what fits us. Data and facts generally come later. That's just the way we're wired. I or no one else is going to change the way we're wired. But when you're making long-term decisions, you have to dig into the data. If something feels good, but it's massively destructive, that's irresponsible. And so we do hear that from investors all the time. Of course, they're great humans too. When I speak in schools, kids want to feel good. They just don't know. So our answer to that is, it's not about feeling good. It's about doing good. Doing good means, what are we actually advocating? What have been the impacts of that before? And what's the number that backs it up? Our gut reaction is feel good. And if you do the data and look into things, do good and feel good. We want to align those two things. And I think candid, honest dialogue is a key way to get there. Whether this is about social issues, inclusivity, governance, environmental issues, pollutants, whatever. Not everybody's an expert in everything, but when you're going to make giant societal or company-wide decisions, dig into the data and align feeling good with things that actually do good.
I think the most powerful opportunity from all perspectives on stage, everybody in the room, everybody not in this room who's interested in the ESG space, is this represents the time where we can tie data to the feel good, to your point. It didn't exist before. The feel good was the squishy. We have a bike share program in Africa. That sounds good, right? But it has nothing to do with the power of your operations, like of how you're actually going to be, minimizing emissions because you're increasing efficiencies, because you have better assets, you have more technology, implemented. Oil and gas doesn't get credit for that. And probably the biggest reason is we didn't talk about it for a while. We just kind of stayed under the radar, kept operating, kept doing what the industry knew to do. And now with, ESG reports coming out, I always like to say it this way. ESG is wonderful because you're already doing 80 to 90% of it. It's just putting it in a different language for investors to feel like you've done what they were expecting you to do. Of course, you've been managing emissions. Now there might be more of an intense focus on it and more capital allocated through, executive decision-making, but you've been doing it. Of course, nobody wants a spill. That's not a good thing to have. It impacts your brand. You have to clean it up. It's expensive. So really what you're doing is just taking what's already been done and telling your investors, we've been doing this and we're doing it quite well. And then we have goals to improve that over the future because this is how we're stacking up our capital expenditures, our policies, our employee training. It all comes with that process we were talking about before of be credible and transparent. So it's really nothing new. There's really, probably to the detriment of our consulting firm, there's really no secret sauce to it. It's just, you got to do it. You got to get credit for what you're already doing. And that's where everybody who's trying to get into this space has more of an opportunity to voice what they need to voice, right? I think what's funny though is the feel. I've seen investors push the feel more than the data. Ironic, is it not? I mean, I have had clients who said, we just had our investors say that we had to get all EV vehicles by 2022 at the cost of millions of dollars to our diesel trucks and blah, blah, blah. That's going to cost us so much money. There's not a lot of, benefit to it because our guys drive thousands of miles every month or whatever the statistic is in the region. So why would we do that? But it felt good for the investor to ask for it. And there was no data behind why you should do it, but goodness, if your portfolio company can report EVs, in Midland or that sounds and feels good. So really to the point of, our up here, what we're saying about data is critical. It's always critical. Stand by what you're doing, give your data to investors and stand by it because they're going to go with the feels too. Everybody goes with the feels. So it's just an interesting perspective that it's not just activism or environmentalists coming at you. It's also your investor groups asking you for the same thing. You got to stick by it and make sure you have a plan.
Yeah. No, investors are interesting. And I think that everyone does what's good for them at some level. And some people are supposed to make money in 2 months and some people are supposed to make money in 5 years. And some people have social value that they want to present themselves in certain ways. I mean, who would have thought a year and a half ago, if you said every movie theater was in the country was going to close, you should invest in a movie theater company. Or all video games are going online, but you should invest in GameStop, and you probably all be retired and not be here now if you would have known that. So I think that it's interesting what their goals and objectives are. I think that in my view, long term, that there's only one way to figure these things out, and it's market-based methods, and the market is going to drive investment where it needs to be over time. And some of that's going to be influenced by social values of society and what people want. Some of that's going to be influenced by how you actually create the most capital and capital gain for the investors. I think that when you start imposing, whether you call it feelings or policies or whatever, that aren't market based, I mean, we've seen a lot of economies go through that over time, not just on energy, but on a number of things. And eventually you run out of money to burn doing that. So from my point of view, I think if you said to people, hey, if you took an individual and said, hey, here's what we're going to do for ESG, and that means your cost of electricity is going up by 50%, or your reliability of your ability to heat your house is going to go down by 50%. As we've been talking about, we need to have all the data in front of people, and long term, if we're coming up with energy solutions that cost more to produce the energy, not only than the alternative sources and fossil fuel, but maybe more than the energy that goes into them, we're making really bad, unsustainable choices, and societies and markets over time collapse when you have that waste of capital, both human capital and financial capital over time. So I'm hoping we can get back to a factually driven topic. And I think that there's a lot of interference in here from the feelings of it that hopefully we work through over time.
Great, thank you. So one of the calls for ESG is to create greater transparency. Practically speaking, what does that mean and who sets the standard?
I'll start. I think that we're in a time right now where the opportunity is the industry sets the standard, and we're quickly moving away from that opportunity. So jump on it now, because this is where our voices get to come in and say, we are transparently reporting, and we're doing this, like I keep harping on this, authentically and transparently. That way, when it gets to the SEC, it's there. But when it comes down from the SEC and when all these, rule makings in the future come through, you can say, you didn't need to manage me to do this. You didn't have to mandate this. We've been doing it. We can prove that we've been doing it. The unfortunate part of that is what we try to discuss is ESG has been sitting in private markets right now, but it's quickly making its way to the government. So I know that we have, public affairs and government affairs who are moving into the ESG space. There's been a little bit of a wall to communicate what do senators and congressmen just in general need to know about what you're doing in oil and gas to self-manage. You don't need a rule to come down and say you have to have X amount of emissions by this one framework. And that was part of what the open period on the SEC put for the climate, the period to solicit feedback for the climate policy and reporting, right? There were thousands and thousands of comments, and it just comes down to, well, we still don't really know what framework is the best. We still don't really know what's the best way to go, but we do know it's important to report on climate. So we'll figure it out. But a rule is going to be coming in October. We'll see where that goes. But ultimately, the transparency of it is driven from the company. So why not talk about it? Why not say what you're doing? Why not give credit to your company where it's through Liberty? You have your report. If anybody asks you where your data comes from, you could come back like that and say it comes from here. These are our processes and policies behind it. Your transparency is driven by your leadership, your ability to put the message out, and by no one else. And that's where it's coming from, but it's changing. So the opportunity really is to do it now so that you can show that you're not reactive, you're proactive in the space.
Yeah, I think transparency is always good when you know what you want to, when there's a goal as to what you're trying to measure and what you're trying to get the transparency on. And to me right now on the environmental side, transparency is kind of a code word for tell us what you do and we'll find what's wrong with it in a variety of different ways, right? So, whether you do this well, we'll focus on this or this. And I think, we've seen this a lot, not to get off topic, but in the last year and a half with dealing with public health issues, the goals seem to shift and move and no one quite knows why they're going the direction they're going. And I think that's very destructive to people's belief in the goals we have and that there's actually a purpose to what we're doing. So taking it back to ESG, I think we need to figure out where we're trying to get to. And to my earlier remarks, if we're only trying to get to the elimination of everything, but we're going to ignore, the human condition, both economically and just general quality of life, we've missed the mark. And I think, it's unpopular to say, but you can't just have one target that lets people suffer the consequences after that. You're not helping people by doing that. No matter what you think the coming climate apocalypse is going to be, we might not make it to that if we can't keep people happy and healthy in their homes. So I think transparency for transparency's sake, I think just allows the conversation to meander. And I think we need to have it, but have it with goals and objectives that are actually being measured quantitatively and evaluated objectively, so we know where we're going and we can help companies get there.
Great. Certainly I love transparency. Again, it's more what reality versus feel. So reporting numbers, and as a lifelong numbers nerd, that's great. But when you look at where the energy is right now in this movement and all the FASB and the multiple boards that are developing ESG standards, right? Well, you have to have something quantitative. But what's the easiest thing quantitative to do with oil and gas companies? Well, greenhouse gases. There's an enormous amount of effort measuring, quantifying, investigating supply chains. So since it's the focus of 75% of the effort, You can quantify it very accurately. Well, hey, I got to give a number and I got to meet my number. So it's pushing effort and focus in one area that it should be, but it's making it paramount among all other areas. And I think there's virtually zero data to support that's a human betterment approach. To give one example, so William Nordhaus, Yale economist, recent Nobel Prize winner, sort of the godfather of climate economists. He spent his whole distinguished career studying climate economics. He did an analysis a bit ago on the Paris Accords. If everybody met their Paris Accords, what would the benefit be to humanity and what would the cost be for humanity? And it's sort of in round numbers, the benefit's something like $25 trillion over the next century. That's a huge number. And the cost about $125 trillion. So basically, $100 trillion of human impoverishment over the next century. And this is a major goal of corporations. We got to align with the Paris Accords because everyone knows what they are. When I wrote our ESG report, I interviewed with 2 major print publications. You didn't announce your alignment with the Paris Accords. You know, don't you feel that's risky or that's wrong? I'm like, the people in the climate world have done their own math and they say it makes humanity $100 trillion poorer. I don't think I'm the odd one not wanting to align with the Paris Accords. What's odd to me is the rush of businesses saying we're aligning with the Paris Accords. And I ask them all the time, based on what? Have you done some math? Is the benefit greater than the cost? Are you making the world a better place? Oh, it isn't about that. It isn't about that. This is what people want to hear. This is what people want to do. And so look, this is not new to climate. There's always manias in society where everyone believes something because everyone else believes it. And lots of very, very bad things come of that. So for us, one of the things we're trying to do proactively and with the energy, I'm looking at ways now to get quantitative bettering human lives metrics so that my company, and I hope other countries in our industry, can report on other metrics that offset that. And pre-COVID, roughly 100 million people in a good year were switching from burning wood and dung to cook their daily meals to burning propane, think a camping stove, single burner propane burning stoves. That's 2.5% of the people that are 4% of the people that are doing that. That, you know, simple math of that, that's over 100,000 lives a year saved from that. It's over an hour a day liberated from women in traditional societies who go and gather the fuel wood every day. They also spend almost an hour a day going to get water or the freshest water they can get. If you have local energy in your village, you can run a groundwater pump. You get over 2 hours a day back for women who, sadly for us men, do all the physical labor in traditional societies. And of course, them and the children who are inside over the fires cooking have shortened, less healthy, worse lives. I could talk about the 2 billion people without access to a billion with no access to electricity, another billion with only a few hours of low wattage electricity that turns a light on, maybe even charges a cell phone, but doesn't allow them to increase their economic productivity and therefore their lot in life. So we need to get better at having, we talk about, I have the data on the problems and the trade-offs here, but I don't have an annual, yeah, we promised a 30% reduction. Here's our 31.5% reduction. And it was audited by these guys. So we don't have equally transparent numbers. And I should say as well, so I don't sound so far divorced from everyone else. We do have it. We spent years and millions of dollars developing a new frac fleet that will have 20 to 25% lower greenhouse gas emissions than any frac fleet available. So we've been drivers of improved technology. It's not like we're the Stone Age people saying, no, don't change. Our belief is just drive changes for things that drive betterment of environmental quality, human life opportunities, drive towards real goals, not someone else's boxes that they put out for you. Think about those critically and carefully. If you believe in them and you think it's a path to human betterment, go for them, but don't just accept them.
Thanks to our panelists. So we're going to have one more question, and then we're going to go to the audience. So as we think about being proactive, we've talked a lot about Colorado and industry leaders being proactive and the need for setting these standards. If you had your crystal ball, and as you think about companies and what companies should be doing, and you look towards the future, what sort of things are investors and shareholders going to be seeking from ESG in the future, and how would you recommend folks prepare for that?
I'll kick us off again. I think looking towards the future, I'm absorbing everything that you were just going through, because I love your position on that, and I'm going to try to actually incorporate that into the next set of comments, because I think it's completely related. What you were highlighting in terms of the value of what energy offers is so true. Like, to strip away energy resources from the countries that need it is the most detrimental thing you can do to that country. Like, what gives us the right to have access to oil and gas and all of this, and to like get our economy moving ahead, while we can tell them we're not going to invest in any infrastructure in third world countries to give you the same. Where that pivots is, for better or worse, unfortunately, investors are not focused on that right now. They're just not there. And it almost feels like the comments that we're talking about right now is where we used to be, the feel good of making a difference. And now ESG has pivoted to and will be again in the future for a while. What is the value that I get out of it? Because we'll call a spade a spade. ESG is popular because it talks about financial value and brand value and capital allocation, and companies who get recognition for it and who have the best in class programs get, allocated, more market money. That's where this all started. So it's a difficult shift to balance between the benefit of energy and where it's going and the differences it makes internationally, to what are the BlackRocks, the State Streets, the Vanguards focused on right now, which is money. Like, they feel, they've proven time and time again in their own investments, Bank of America has studies that if you have a credible, legitimate ESG program, you outperform the market. I realize, I know there's people in this room that are thinking there's been other studies that don't show that necessarily. It does. It goes both ways. But for the credible ones, the top quartile, there's that outperformance. So we'll just, for the sake of time and argument, we'll stick with that for a moment. So in my opinion, where it's going is, I hope it goes back to what we're talking about, as to what changes the world and what leads to more equality, on an international level. In terms of where I see, ESG going in the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to be unquestionably focused on governance. It's no longer enough to just put data out there and check the box. It's, what is your company doing to make decisions that factor ESG into your day-to-day business strategy? And they're going to be holding companies accountable for that. That's what they're going to be focused on. It's no longer enough to have a SASB table and put in a Glass report and call it a day. How do your executives actively make decisions or not, choose to do a certain project because of its ESG implications? That is absolutely where we're going with that. And then it also, we're already talking about it, it's the auditing of the data. It's no longer going to be enough to just put a report out and hope that's enough. People are going to be coming in and asking to audit your data. I mean, I talked about that a little bit of our client that had an investor accuse them, and then E&Y jumped in. We're going to be seeing that all the time. So investors are going to be asking for that second opinion, because there's too much financial value riding on it. So they're going to require that proof. So I love what you were saying, because I couldn't agree with you more. And I hope it moves back in that realm in terms of what investors are doing and the drive behind it. It's unfortunately really focused on that bottom line. Unfortunately or unfortunately, it also helps drive decision making, what's cost effective and all that. But it's a balance of the two. And I think the companies who have balanced that most is oil and gas. We've talked about the economic and the community impacts, the industry's making for decades and decades and decades. That should never change. And so I love what your company is doing to really start to measure that quantitatively as well.
Yeah, I guess I'll end optimistic. Look, people in general, most everyone around the world wants to make the world a better place. They want their neighbor, their fellow person to have a better life. That's in our genes. That is a nearly universal human value. It's fantastic. So all I'm talking about, I think we need to redirect it. a little bit. There's other areas you could say the same thing. But I think people also value and can sense sincerity and authenticity. If you give a report, you check someone's boxes and you got a smile on, you got pretty pictures, but they can tell your heart's not in it. You don't really believe it. Everyone can see that. If you tell a different story that maybe you're afraid to because it's different from what everyone else is saying, but you believe it and you can back it up, people respect that. They like that. They'll believe in that. It is up to our industry to broaden this dialogue and to bring the facts forward. Everyone will say to me that it's all there in the IPCC reports. People should know or see that. Well, they're 4,000 pages long. No one reads them. Politicians, activists, and media don't read them either, but they write sensationalist summaries that captures people's attention. We have let a small group of highly motivated politicians, media, activists design a narrative that's great for them and feels good, and we've just passively gone along with it. They say we're terrible, but actually we're less bad than you think we are. That's wrong, bullshit, and a losing strategy. Up to us to just speak up. We have to be bold. We got to get our heads out of the foxholes, and we just have to be honest. I don't know an industry with more people that care passionately about the communities they work in, usually poor rural communities, and the people in their companies, and want to make a better place. We just got to stand up, be honest, be credible. Don't be anti-alarmist like the other side. We've got to be honest. But I think that strategy truly works. I think investors want to hear it. The youth of the country want to hear it. I talk on climate change at CU. People say I'm going to get stoned. Absolutely not. If you're honest and credible and believe in what you're saying, people know that. They'll accept that. That's up to us. It's on our industry. No one else is going to stand up for us. Let's be honest and let's stand up.
I mean, I think one of the great challenges boards and CEOs have is there's trends in everything. There's trends in products and services and, you know, social trends and all the things happening around you. And it's really your job to keep the company focused on what your mission is and how you're going to get through that and how you're going to invest through that. And this ESG thing has kind of been a little bit of a game of whack-a-mole, right? Like I'm not going to be the worst guy on the block and they'll get someone else and you try to do that, but or companies try to do that. And I think what you need to do is to your point, Chris, you know who you are, be who you are. And you know, in our case, as a smaller company at Stabilis, we were, you know, committed to the idea that there could be better solutions out there than what we have. We were committed to participating in those solutions with the resources we had, but we weren't committed to completely diverting our capital spending and our investment strategy based on things that were ideas and not proven parts of our core business and not proven to help our customers with their core businesses. So I think overall, the companies need to be open to the ideas, genuinely open, but also avoid plowing capital and time and resources into investments that at the end of the day aren't going to prove to be fruitful, because that doesn't help the company by any means. No one's going to remember in 5 years when you burned all your cash on a project that didn't work. They're going to remember that you have no more cash. So I think you need to make sure, you know, you're being responsible that way while being open to other ideas and you know, spending the time and energy you need to spend on them while staying focused with where you are.
So I think we have time for one question from the audience. Is there anyone out there that has a question for our panelists?
I own a small environmental firm with my partner, and I don't know a lot about ESG, but it's, you know, for us, it's a very big idea. And so is there something that we can do as environmental consultants to help be a part of the creating the metrics and be a resource and help contribute?
Absolutely.
Yes, everybody. Now that you don't have the mic, what is it, you know, that your firm is looking to do? Is it a specific area of environmental, like water, air, all across the board?
So we specifically are a very small firm. We're the bugs and bunnies, environmental, natural resources, cultural resources, pre-construction. But I know we have a lot of colleagues in other environmental firms that are larger with more outreach, but you know, we often have to I guess, defend ourselves to our compatriots that are in park service or open space that know we work for oil and gas. And I think we know better than anyone what oil and gas companies have done, especially on the midstream and E&P sector, which is where we work, to not only follow the regulations, but to have a strong presence in helping with preserve and protect the environment. And so what can we do to help companies, for us to be a resource for them to ask us questions on what can we do to create these metrics to make it so it's a system in their company and they don't have to wonder about should we do this or that.
I'd love to, hand it off as well. But from my perspective as to what you can offer is, companies have a certain level of expertise and knowledge that they bring in, which is really primarily the running and the operations of the company, right? And so when it comes to sustainability, the most successful companies in the ESG space admit that they don't know what they don't know. And they bring in experts like yourself to say, listen, we're operating in this region and we need to understand what the ecological biodiversity implications are of us building a pipeline through here. Like if we wanted to build this out, what are the unusually sensitive areas we're going to have to navigate? If you were to come in and provide credible metrics to them, not just a nice, they're bunnies, don't hit them. You know what I mean? Like you want to give them actual metrics and say, these are what from our expert advice you avoid, you maintain. That is invaluable to oil and gas. They need people like you on the ground who absorb the ins and outs of the environmental due diligence of this and to make it into a number, a value, a strategy. Otherwise, it's kind of a guessing game and not everybody can be an expert in everything. So I think you should just, present yourselves as an expert in the areas of which you offer that value. But I can hand it off.
You need to trademark the Bugs and Bunny Index.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That's what it's going to be.
And look, I'll end with saying, look, what you do is incredibly important. But too often that's viewed as I work for X company and they want to get permits and here's the regs and I got to make sure they're in compliance with the regs. And you need to do that. But you two are humans. You know more about bugs and bunnies than they do. You know more about bugs and bunnies than the people that wrote the regs. So beyond complying with the regs, just give your candid opinions. Hey, what really matters? The regs say you got to do this and these both comply. But this colony is going to be fine. This one's at risk. It's already declining. Give what's the right thing in addition to complying, just from your heart. People want to do the right thing. If there's two options and they both comply with the permits, but one's better, you're going to feel better about telling them, hey, I think this is actually better. They're going to feel better saying they understood beyond the regs. It's humans now trying to do the right thing. I think what you're doing is very important. Give your honest, candid opinions, work with your partners, and be proud of it.
Let's thank our panelists.
Thank you so much, Christy, for moderating that panel. And thank you to our panelists for joining us. It was fantastic. A lot of great information out there.